It's now time for some AD&D on Common Sense for Uncommon Times. We've all become familiar with the acronym for ADD, which is sort of at the root of these segments. But have you ever thought about the availability we have of news and information today versus over a century ago? Informational access was so challenging that some people battling on the front lines in the First World War were still fighting well after a truce had been reached. And did you know that during the days of the Pony Express and the limited telegraph services, it took days to learn about the outcomes of the elections? Well, modern technology has improved so many other things. But today, content and news can hit us every few seconds on TVs, computers, phones, and even watches. We live in the age of information overload. The result is that we are often distracted from important and urgent issues of the day by inconsequential and even trivial things. To complicate matters, some people prefer that we remain uninformed or ignorant about important issues that will significantly impact us. Politicians frequently wait to release important news and announcements that may reflect poorly on them and their policies until late on Fridays, once people have entered their weekend routine. Then there are other people who intentionally blast us with misdirection, misinformation, and lies in order to cloak their real activities. Congressman Jim Jordan carefully articulated this the other day when recounting the timeline surrounding President Biden's claims about the innocence of his son and his own personal lack of involvement in Hunter Biden's business dealings.
Yeah, it seems like he's doing business deals in all kinds of countries that are adversaries to the United States. It's Ukraine. It's Ukraine's not adversary, but at the time it was a corrupt kind of place when he's over there. But Russia and China. And of course, remember how the story has changed. When we pointed this out yesterday, at first when this came out 2 years ago, it was, oh, no, it's not Hunter Biden's laptop. It's just Russian disinformation. And then it was, well, okay, it's his laptop. Maybe it's really not Russian disinformation. But President Biden wasn't involved. Remember, he said, I have no knowledge of my son's business dealings. Well, now we got all kinds of documents and evidence that are showing that Joe Biden was involved. Hunter Biden was asking to get a key for him to be able to get to his office suite that he had, along with the emissary for the chairman of the Chinese energy company. We know that he was involved. We've had testimony from an eyewitness, Mr. Bobolinsky, who talked about the big guy. So now this story has changed from it wasn't his laptop. It was his laptop, but it was Russian disinformation. Oh, okay, he wasn't really involved. Now he's involved, but it didn't impact his decisions as president of the United States. Oh, really? Okay, maybe, but it's changed dramatically. So we do think it's important to get to the bottom of all this and show the American people the truth.
Last week, I referenced the president's lies surrounding the student loan forgiveness plan and showed a video clip where he asserted how he got it passed into law. I explained that was a blatant lie, and I expressed my belief that the courts would eventually rule on the unconstitutional nature of Biden's actions, but probably not until after the election. To my surprise, only a few days, actually 2 days after the election, a judge intervened and ruled accordingly. Unfortunately, Biden's false promise to college students motivated them to go to the polls and support Democratic candidates before they learned the truth. Instead of getting a presidential promise, I truly hope they learn the lesson in election year politics. Someone recently suggested that I offer a bit more background for these AD&D segments, which is why I'm diving into a little bit deeper today. In a culture of information overload, misinformation, and lies, we have politicians and news media pounding us with so much stuff while distracting us from what they're really advancing. These policies are often illegitimate and with no constitutional standing, and they will greatly impact us, our kids, and generations to follow. So when you see this, and then you see this, you can know that I'm talking about an issue needing more attention. We've long heard the statement, the only thing necessary for the triumph of evil is for good men to do nothing. The problem is, we're getting hit with so much every moment of every day that we struggle to discern the truth from fiction. With all the noise and unintentional and intentional diversions, the lies and cover-ups, we all struggle with what I call attention deficit news disorder, or AD&D. On today's installment of Common Sense for Uncommon Times, I'm going to address in part how the lame duck Congress is misusing language, creating noise and false narratives to advance legislation that will violate the First Amendment of the Constitution and the religious freedom and liberties of American citizens. And as they often do, Democrats are cloaking this under the title that misrepresents the truth of their agenda. Thank you for joining me again on another installment of AD&D on Common Sense for Uncommon Times, where we equip and encourage believers to respond to issues of our day with common sense from a biblical perspective. As in other AD&D segments, today's focus is primarily on one topic that isn't being discussed enough. It hits square on how President Biden and the Democrats are advancing a national policy that, if passed, will violate the First Amendment of the Constitution. This law has been dubiously named the Respect for Marriage Act. The backers of this legislation are pushing it because they want to codify same-sex marriage into law. Since the Supreme Court recently ruled that Roe v. Wade had no constitutional standing, Democrats are fearful the Obergefell decision will also be returned to the states. By creating a federal law, they are painting an illusion that this will help reinforce the decision made by the prior activist court. These are the same people who, for over 50 years, shouted that choosing to kill one's own child was a constitutional right, all because another activist Supreme Court created an illusion that it was. Democrats didn't support that measure until they realized that they could appeal to a targeted group of voters. And you know what? They have a long history of this type of thing. Just remember, a lie remains a lie no matter how many times it is repeated, even if it takes 50 to 100 years to correct. With this law, they are seeking to create a special protected class among people who want to marry someone of the same sex. Under the guise of inclusivity and anti-discrimination, this law will exclusively discriminate against Christians and people who subscribe to religions that identify same-sex relations as sin. Now, I don't believe that you will find a genuine Christian with intentions of harming or discriminating against anyone in the LGBT community. And before someone tries to pin the tragedy of what happened in Colorado Springs this past weekend or in Orlando in 2016, keep this in mind. After the Orlando event, those on the left attempted to assign blame to conservatives, Christians, and Second Amendment advocates. We soon learned that the Orlando gunman was a radical terrorist who was seeking indiscriminate vengeance on a large group, all because the U.S. previously targeted another terrorist in Iraq. There is still much to be learned about the Colorado Springs situation, and we need to let the investigators figure out what that is. Many in the faith community simply don't want to participate in celebrating something that God identifies as sin. You can choose to disagree with the conclusion of those religions, but you can't deny that is the belief held by Orthodox Christians and many in the Jewish faith, as well as other faiths. So why is this a big deal? Well, over the past few years, artists, bakers, florists, photographers, and others have declined using their talents, crafts, and energies to create and participate in the celebration of same-sex unions and weddings. One by one, they have been sued by individuals and government entities and fined, all because they chose to live according to the tenets of their faith that teach them not to celebrate sin. Some of these creative artists have been forced out of business and fined heavily. Others have won their lawsuits, but only after much financial cost to themselves, their businesses, and families, along with personal attacks by LGBT activists who mischaracterize them and their faith. With the help of good law firms like Alliance Defending Freedom and Liberty Counsel, some citizens have won their cases because they successfully reminded the courts of a simple clause in the First Amendment of the Constitution, which reads, "Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion or prohibiting the free exercise thereof." Exercising your religious freedom doesn't end when you leave the doors of your church. Deep in the heart of the supposed Respect for Marriage Act is the intention of forcing all Americans to celebrate sexual activity even when it violates their theological beliefs. While these prior lawsuits have been filed according to the statutes and rules within the states, now the entire weight and resources of the federal government could be used to punish the photographer who says that she won't invest her time, talents, and creative resources to participate and celebrate a same-sex wedding. This, however, is not limited to wedding vendor-type businesses. If you work with a Christian ministry or nonprofit, they can come after you and use this against your entity. Suppose a Christian university has housing for married students. They could be forced to allow students who are married to someone of the same sex. A seminary could be forced to admit a student in a gay marriage, even though the seminary holds to the Bible teaching that marriage is between a man and a woman. You might ask, so if this is unconstitutional, why do you care? Won't it be struck down by the court? That is entirely the wrong attitude in question. Consider the College of the Ozarks. It is a private Christian school. They receive no federal funding, either directly or indirectly, through student aid. For the last year and a half, they have been embroiled in a lawsuit with the U.S. Department of Housing and Urban Development under the Biden administration. They are accused of violating the Fair Housing Act to not discriminate based on sexual orientation or gender identity. People and institutions shouldn't have to spend countless dollars and resources to defend themselves against unfounded lawsuits. This law will encourage more of this behavior. How many livelihoods must be destroyed? How many institutions must spend millions of dollars in legal defenses to prove what common sense intuitively tells us? Laws do not supersede the Constitution. Every law is supposed to have a constitutional reason for existing. This one does not. No one has a constitutional guarantee to marry someone of the same sex, just as no one has a right to abort a child through 9 months of birth or pregnancy. Furthermore, no one has a guarantee to force others to acknowledge, endorse, and celebrate same-sex unions. In another recent podcast, I referenced how leftists celebrated fashion designer Sophie Telley, who refused to make a ball gown for Melania Trump based solely on Ms. Telley's hatred of Donald Trump's politics. Do you think she should have been forced to abandon her principles and make a gown? Do you think an abortion advocate who owns a t-shirt business should be forced to design and print shirts for the March for Life parade? Of course not. That would be ridiculous. These same leftists want to force Christians, Muslims, and Jews to use their creative talents and celebrate something that violates their First Amendment guarantee. During this lame duck Congress, Senator Chuck Schumer and House Speaker Nancy Pelosi are trying to cram this bill through while Democrats still maintain control of the House of Representatives. You know, some bills die in committee. Some die because they never make it to a floor vote because not enough senators believe the bill has merits for voting on it. Senate Democrats have long attempted using the filibuster to block bills they didn't like from reaching the Senate floor for a vote. The only way minority Republicans can stop this train from leaving the station is through the same process. If the Senate gets 60 cloture votes, that means they can force the stop of debate on a bill and proceed to a final floor vote. A minority of 41 senators can stop bad bills from going through. After all these years, Biden and the Democrats are now saying the filibuster and cloture is a bad Senate rule. These are the same people, including Majority Leader Chuck Schumer, who have abused this process countless times to stop bills they don't like. During Donald Trump's presidency, the Senate voted They had to vote a record 529 times to stop Democratic filibusters. Now that Biden is president and his favorability numbers are low and he's losing the House, he wants the Senate to abolish the filibuster rule. With regards to this Disrespect for Marriage Act, one rather innocuous amendment made it into the bill that might help protect churches, but it does nothing to protect individuals and religious nonprofits. Democrats have been saying for a long time that they are going to use any means possible to go after the nonprofit status of organizations they don't like. And you know what? We still don't have any idea of President Biden's intentions for those 87,000 new IRS agents that he plans on hiring. Some Republican senators, including Mike Lee, have drafted amendments for this bill that would ensure religious institutions and businesses owned by Christians and religious individuals would not be forced to violate their faith. Senate Democrats have refused to even allow discussion, debates, or votes on these proposed amendments. Do you see the pattern and the hypocrisy here? Democrats say it's wrong for Republicans to block the bill, and they want to strike the rule that permits them to do it. Meanwhile, they won't even allow discussion of amendments that would help solve the primary problems Republicans have with the bill. If the bill goes to a Senate floor for the vote, they only need 51 votes for it to proceed to Biden's desk. And if it becomes law, if the Senate, which is evenly divided 50-50 among Democrats and the Republicans, had a tie vote, Vice President Kamala Harris would break that tie. The bad news is a cloture vote was held before they left Washington for Thanksgiving, and 12 Republicans sided with the Democrats to support cloture. Based on what these defecting senators have said, it's probable they won't need Harris to break a tie. For the record, I want you to hear the names of the Republican senators who have crossed the line and voted with the Democrats. These are the Republican senators: Roy Blunt of Missouri, Richard Burr of North Carolina, Shelley Capito of West Virginia, Susan Collins of Maine, Joni Ernst of Iowa, Cynthia Lummis, Wyoming, Lisa Murkowski, Alaska, Rob Portman of Utah, and Dan Sullivan, also of Utah, Tom Tillis, North Carolina, and Todd Young of Indiana. Usually, a bill only has one cloture vote. But here's the good news. For procedural reasons that I don't fully understand, the way this bill is crafted requires it go through multiple cloture steps and votes. There will be 2 more votes as soon as they return to D.C. next week for cloture. So what can we do? If you live in one of these states, call, email, and call your senator again and tell them to stand for the religious liberties protected in the First Amendment and oppose this bad legislation. If you don't know where to start, I encourage you to go to the website for FRC Action and look at their information on the more appropriately labeled Disrespect for Marriage Act. They also have a text number set up to give you some really good information for your state. Text the word marriage to 67742. Now, for the record, this podcast is not a part of Family Research Council or FRC Action. I simply know they have great research and resources. Those links can also be found in the description, along with a link to all the phone numbers of the U.S. senators. Again, those primary senators, those senators that we want to go after are Roy Blunt, Richard Burr, Shelley Capito, Susan Collins, Joni Ernst, Cynthia Lummis, Lisa Murkowski, Rob Portman, Mitt Romney, Dan Sullivan, Tom Tillis, and Todd Young of Indiana. Even if you live in another state, call your senator and tell them you know this is bad law. Or again, text marriage to 67742. Your senator may be able to encourage others to listen to a call for common sense. Democrats and LGBT activists claim this law will simply allow people to marry whomever they love. So what's next? Polygamy? In the last 30 to 40 years, the progression of the LGBT activists has gone from seeking acceptance to seeking endorsement and celebration of their engagement in sexual activities that is defined as a sin, again, in many religions. If you personally choose not to endorse them and celebrate them, they now want to force you, and if you resist, they want to punish you. We need 3 more Republican senators to stand up for the First Amendment and religious liberty and oppose this cloture vote. Upon returning to Washington, D.C. from their Thanksgiving break, the Senate will have final cloture votes. If Schumer achieves the 60-vote threshold, the bill will proceed to the floor for a final vote, and then they will probably just coast to the finish line. Most all the news outlets are ignoring the concerns raised by Senators Mike Lee, James Lankford, Ted Cruz, and 35 other Republicans. It's up to us to reach out to our senators during their Thanksgiving break and tell them to oppose this bad law, respecting the establishment of religion and prohibiting the free exercise thereof. Tell your senators to respect the Constitution and do their job. Tell them that they should not allow their legacy to be one of abandoning principle to get along with those who don't even want to discuss worthy amendments. Tell them to quit allowing the Democratic power brokers and their press corps, known as the media, to continue burying the truth. And that right there is some common sense for uncommon times. You can find the latest and prior episodes of Common Sense for Uncommon Times right here on this platform where you're watching this video. You can also look it up under Common Sense for Uncommon Times or check for Chris Curry. Check it out on Facebook, Gab, Parler, Telegram, Truth Social, Twitter, and probably others that I've forgotten. Additionally, videos are archived on Rumble and sometimes on YouTube. Until next time, as we take a cue from Galatians 6:9, let us not become weary in doing good, for at the proper time we will reap a harvest if we do not give up. Have a great day.